Privet, Katila, WanderingRusski desu. Today I wanted to do another off-the-cuff video, a video on just speaking my mind, no script. I wrote a few notes down because this topic has been on my mind for a while, and it's the concept of direct democracy. This is, and not just direct democracy in the abstract, but a certain idea of a national direct ballot initiative proposed by none other than Kyle Kulinski. So first of all, he brought up this idea about 2 years ago, and he now it's like his big pet peeve project. It's something that he thinks he's like, it's one of the biggest ways we could actually fundamentally get our issues across. So they tried the legislative process, it's not working. This direct ballot initiative will finally get everything we want. We could sidestep the whole governing process. If we could just manipulate the people, they'll vote for us. So basically use the mob to push our agenda. Now, why is he doing this? Why is he pushing these sort of direct ballot initiative? The reason being is because there's a few provisos that he fundamentally assumes. First of all, that his progressive policies are popular. And if you just simply ask the people to do it, don't look at the corruption. Don't look at the at the people voting. If you simply looked at it, if you just simply talked to the people would approve almost every single left-wing proposal. So, knowing that, he's like, okay, well, why don't we just sidestep the whole process and just ask them to vote? And he's like, we could vote on 5 issues and yada yada every 2 years. Okay, so what are the problems with this idea? We could talk on and on about those principles. Well, let's say all those principles are true, that his policies are indeed popular and everything. We could go a whole other video on why they're actually not. But there's a few. It's been on my mind for a long time on what exactly Kyle's talking about when it comes to why he's wrong, why this actually isn't going to be the magic bullet that mostly clears everything. It's pretty much going to be the same thing. The only upside for this is that if everything passes and everything's good, the only thing this gives so-called progressives is that it gives them a sort of democratic mandate to it might be easier to push laws through the Congress, but that's all it will do. And let me explain why that's the only thing that could conceivably be good coming out of it. So there's a few things I put up. So a few questions. So the video I'm referencing for Kyle is, it's time for a more direct democratic system in America. It was posted on November 10th, 2018. I looked through, it's about a 10-minute video. And there's a few things. So I'm going to go through it bit by bit. The first thing he mentions about talking about direct democracy, he wants to make it clear that it's not a complete direct democracy. Constitutional rights are off the table, and he mentions gay marriage. So one thing you have to know is that Kyle's idea that, for example, when he says healthcare is a human right, he means healthcare is a human right. I could bet you that if you told him, hey, we put a thing on the ballot that says repeal Medicare for all, and 53% of the people wanted to overturn it because they didn't want to get rid of their private insurance, are you going to support getting rid of that? He's like, no, that's a constitutional right. That's a human right. He's not going to let a majority, at least his core beliefs. You might get him to admit that his more or less important issues, he's going to be able to approve. He might give you the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, if they repeal that, that's fine. But his core issues, like Medicare for all and free college and such, he's not going to let the majority overturn it. But he doesn't think about that because he thinks if people just support it, so we don't even have to have that conversation. And it's just funny how he just mentions gay marriage. That's not a constitutional right. It was just thrown out of thin air by an activist Supreme Court. So basically he wants to make it clear that your core constitutional rights aren't going to be on the ballot. So that this is to tame the tyranny of the majority. But what exactly is a constitutional right? This is always in question. I mean, so there's, every day, every year, there's always, some things are constitutional rights, some things are not. And, so, what exactly is a human right? Now, obviously, to Kyle, healthcare is a human right, but, so, is that going to be on the table? Well, probably not. What he wants is basically just an easier way. This isn't about, protecting constitutional rights. It's more well, obviously, constitutional rights are everything I want, and you can't vote on it. basically. Um, and then, so basically that, all constitutional rights are off the table when it comes to voting. So only, but, as I mentioned, he's gonna not, I don't think he's gonna, maybe I'll be proven wrong, but he's not gonna, like, concede that healthcare could be overturned by a vote. Now, another thing he mentions before he get to the main problems with direct democracy is he attacks direct democracy itself. He's like, well, why do we outsource our decision making, to corrupt assholes, as he calls them? Well, so this basically, I think he's never heard about why every country in the world is a representative democracy and not a direct one. First of all, I mean, do I even have to explain that 300 million people can't convene and debate and decide on a law? This just can't happen. Direct democracy. Why we have a legislative process is because we have people whose jobs are to represent the people and, debate and discuss and vote on these laws. And, yes, it's not perfectly representative, not 100%, but the reason why we have representative democracy because it's more fair, it's more just, and it's more manageable. And direct democracy can work on a small scale, like in a city-state level. But there's a reason why, if you think 300 million people come together and just vote on, these issues, and, then all you're doing is letting the sales of the nation be decided by the mob. You're not, I think we would all agree that laws should be based upon technical, at the very least be listened to by technical experts and debate the details. But people don't have that. They don't have time to be debating, the details about how exactly healthcare is going to be funded and what's going to be covered, etc. And what this will also do is that you would have a California, San Francisco liberal voting on the decisions that will impact the lives of a rural Iowa farmer, and then vice versa. Which is why a representative democracy would be much better, where this group of this rural area in Iowa, they're going to vote for a representative, and they're going to vote based on the interests of those rural communities. And then someone voted from San Francisco is going to represent the people of San Francisco who are overwhelmingly Democratic. And that's why it's more fair, rather than a mob, and obviously, as I mentioned, is more manageable. So he kind of shoots saying, why don't we have direct democracy? Why do we give it to representatives? Well, those are the reasons. Direct democracy is just unsustainable. Now, at least in the large part, in a country like the United States. Now, we're gonna go straight now from here on to a few issues that are wrong with his. Let's say his thing goes through. Let's just ignore his pleads, his previous things. What are some things that are wrong? So the third thing is, the idea basically is it's going to bypass the corruption. The reason why it doesn't get through the traditional legislative process is because of the corruption of all the corporate people are bought off. And the fundamental pillar, as I said, is that progressives are popular, and if the people directly vote, they will win. A few problems, though. So the first question I have about this direct democracy bill is, who decides what's get put on the ballot? That's a good question. Who decides what's going to be those 5 issues, right? And how detailed does the ballot go? For example, in Kyle's mind, he's like, okay, we're going to get Medicare for all. Do you support Medicare for all? Yes or no? Do you support free college? Yes or no? Do you support a living wage? Yes or no? Do you support a Green New Deal? Yes or no? And do you support ending the wars? Yes or no? And his mind's like, okay, they're all going to say yes, and we're going to get all these passed in 2 years' time. Everything's going to be so hunky-dory and great. Question, though. Do you understand, how detailed, changing 20% of an economy is? Because that's how big the healthcare sector is. Do you understand, the nooks and crannies? You understand that a healthcare process is going to be extraordinarily complicated to, decide on. You can't just say a slogan. That's not going to help. And, what do you mean by Medicare for all? Now, they're like, well, I have my idea what's Medicare for all. So, the idea the reason why we have a legislative process, this is another why representative democracy is better than a direct democracy, is because you could actually debate the details of it. You can't, in a direct democracy, the people are just presented with an idea. Do you support giving yourself free healthcare? Oh, that sounds okay. Yeah, it sounds great. But do you understand like the complexities of it? That's why when you actually get to the details, like, oh yeah, you have to get rid of your private insurance and your taxes go up. People's support if it goes down. Now, to be clear, I actually support universal healthcare, but if you go to the details, people aren't going to actually, it's not as simple as a simple slogan. It's not as easy as that. So for example, and there's a few things. So he's like, well, the legislator determines. Like, there's a few states where the legislator has to vote on a issue to be put on the ballot, and then it's put on the ballot. Okay, well, then you're back to square one. You have the politicians deciding what's going to be put on the ballot. And then, if it passes enough to be on the ballot, then you might as well just make it push through the legislative session and not deal with this whole democratic stuff. And second, and if it's decided by a petition, like, okay, well, actually, the people are going to make a petition. Okay, but who decides, like, what petitions are granted? If it's at a certain signature level, then what if a signature, what if it's like, well, I want the governor to wear like a pirate hat, and a lot of people sign for that. Should the legislator like allow that to be on the ballot? Is that just a stupid issue? And what if like, yeah, how about we like abolish capitalism? Now Kyle might be fine with that, and he might. And a lot of people on the left are like, oh, that'd be great. We would put that on the legend. But what if it's like, like who decides which petitions are going to be granted for the 5 issues? There's only 5. There's millions of issues. Like there are thousands of issues, right? What if who decides? Is the governor? What if the governor's right wing? He puts the right wing issues on the ballot. Like, hey, we're going to restrict immigration. We're going to we're going to ban gay marriage. We're going to limit abortion. We're going to expand gun rights. Is this fine? Are people going to be fine? What if they just put all pro right wing stuff on? I mean, who decides which petitions get granted? So basically, yeah, it's basically the complexities of exactly what are you going to put on the ballot. It's not easy, because Kyle's idea is if we just put my issues on the ballot, these slogans, because I think what's happening is that he's starting to become enamored with slogans like Medicare for All, Green New Deal, without necessarily realizing that there's so much more complexity to the whole goddamn energy sector, the whole goddamn healthcare system. I don't think he realizes the complexities, and I think that he's been too enamored with slogans. The second problem I have is that as I said, the whole idea is to prevent corruption. But all you're doing is taking the corruption that will take place, let's just take your argument that the corruption is taking place in the legislative process. All that's going on is that instead of trying to influence the political votes of representatives, the people are going to dump huge amount, big business and big corporations are going to dump huge amounts of money to sway the people for ballot initiatives. Basically all you're doing is you're going to have tons of ads like, this is why this is bad, why this is good, etc., etc. So it's like, instead of, he mentions like ExxonMobil, instead of ExxonMobil lobbying Congress, they're going to dump tons of money for that. Now his idea is that we're just going to abolish, money in politics, which needs a constitutional amendment, but, he's like, well, we're just going to not have anyone campaign. We're not going to have anyone, spend money to advertise or back up an issue. So basically all that's going on is that no one's going to be able to debate this issue. It's just going to be up to the people to decide. This is obviously an infringement on the First Amendment and stupid. But at the moment though, you have to get a constitutional impasse, and until you get that moment, you'll have to deal with the same corrupt processes that you're railing against. Basically all you're doing is you're putting more hands to the mob to be swayed and destroy your issue. That's all you're doing. So basically the whole idea of this is to bypass corruption, while as basically it's null and void. You actually won't debate and you won't get rid of any sort of the corruption at all. And you'll still get people trying to sway. He even mentions sometimes people get swayed. But he's like, basically the whole thing is, it won't actually bypass the whole corrupt system. The system will just move from trying to influence the legislators to influencing the public. Lastly, basically, so let's say it passes. Let's say we figure out how a ballot gets on, and we get rid of the corruption. There's no corruption. People just vote. And it's like, Medicare for all, yes or no? Yes. Okay, now what? Like, what happens then? Like, how does it get implemented exactly? Like, let's say free college gets passed. Or let's stick with Medicare for all. Let's say Medicare for all gets passed. Why, like, what happens then? Like, what's the... I think in Kyle's mind, it's like, oh, we suddenly get Medicare for all. But again, like, how detailed is it? Like, Medicare for all is approved. All you did is basically do a huge opinion poll. That's all you did. And unless we, like, put a goddamn law in place, like, hey, listen, this is the whole law, then the whole thing wouldn't, this is the law. Well, and this is like, there's like 400 pages because it's about the whole healthcare sector. So it's like 400 in the details. That's not going to be efficient at all, and no one's going to look through them. And so it's going to be very clear, very simple. And then, so what usually happens? Usually what happens is that either, as I mentioned, the legislative process already votes on the bill and puts it into the people's hands, which if they approve it, then it goes to the governor. And second of all, which doesn't, you're back on square one. You basically have to get the approval of the legislative process first. And second of all, if it's just directly from the people, then it would go straight to the legislative process to debate the details, and then you're back to square one again. Basically, and if it's, like, let's say it's Medicare for all, but like, what if they were debating and, when they're writing the bill, they make a public option, like, but that's not what I wanted. Well, it was so vague that people just interpreted Medicare for all to mean public option. What's the, like, how detailed is the thing going to be? And, and is it going to be, like, forced? Like, what if people just don't represent, let's say it passes, but no one votes on it. They're like, man, whatever. Is this just more of, like, a suggestion? Like, what's the mechanism to force lawmakers to vote on it? And second of all, like, like, what if they don't vote for it? Like, I mean, you can't, like, force someone, like, hey, unless it's, like, we democratically want a living wage, like, a minimum wage increase. You can't just, it's not, I mean, as far as I know, maybe I'm wrong, but if someone votes on it, it doesn't just automatically raise. There's the way it works is he has to go through a legislative process. As I mentioned before, the only thing you get is that when people want to push Medicare for all and it passed through a majority in a ballot initiative, it gives them, like, more credence. That's the big thing that gets out of this for the progressives. Again, this is assuming they're all popular. And, are we going to jail people who vote against it? Like, what if they're like, well, actually, the way the bill is finally written with all the details, I just don't think that's what it meant when it went on the ballot. So, also, a lot of this is probably unconstitutional. A lot, like, for example, like, tax bills have to be, like, originated in the House. Like, you can't even, you don't have the idea of just, like, oh, yeah, let's legalize tax and regulate marijuana. If we just put that on the ballot, it'll pass, and then we have that. That's not how it works. You vote for it, and then it goes back to the legislative process. Or it goes through the legislative process, and then goes to you. Either way, you're stuck, and you didn't bypass any sort of corruption at all. And plus, we have the philosophical position of why should the mob decide? Like, why should the mob decide, why should the people decide, like, every single issue, Anyway, and he also, now, those are kind of my core, like, why this wouldn't work. And there's a few other things he mentions in the video. He mentions, like, so he mentions that with it, well, I'm an empiricist. Left-wing policy positions always win. Well, okay, but what if, let's say, and that's true. But that's because if you put things like raise, like, the minimum wage, fund children's hospitals and schools, build high-speed rail, of course that will, who wouldn't vote for it? Because the thing is, it's so abstract. They're not like, hey, you, are you willing to give up 25% of your paycheck for these things? They're like, oh. Basically, it's like we want to be charitable on someone else's dime. They think the government is just some piggy bank that could just spend without delay. So that's why things like free healthcare and free college and having no social laws are popular, because they, in the abstract, they sound great until the rubber hits the road. That's what happened to Medicare for all. Medicare for all sounded great, and then it tanked in in popularity after it was actually starting to like, oh yeah, you also have to lose your private insurance. Now, in my opinion, I don't care. I actually agree with single payer advocates, but I'm just saying popular will does not necessitate that your bill would be passed. So again, it's abstract thinking, and again, like he thinks in terms of slogans, like Medicare for all, free college, living wage. That's why he sounds like a wonk, because he's like spitting out all these facts, all these positions, but he doesn't actually go to the nitty gritty. And then lastly, he says, well, it's all the right-wing people against this. He's like, well, what happened to the battle of ideas, the marketplace of ideas? If you believe that, then you should be in favor of it. Well, here's the thing. The term of a marketplace of ideas when you debate is the term when, like, citizens debate and discuss and battle out, on philosophical and practical policies and political theories in an open civil debate. We, toss and turn on different ideas and everything like that. That does not mean we have like mob rule control what happens to the government and how the government should function. That's not how it works. And like, for example, should we, most things in a complicated industrial society, you have to have a government that is with experts, with a bureaucracy. That is just the modern state of things. You can't just get rid of it. Because, for example, the EPA, they have experts there and they're like, okay, well, we have the power to regulate waterways, and then they decide what exactly that means. Well, are we going to put to the vote like what exactly protecting waterways means to the public? No one knows what that means. That's why there's a bureaucracy. So, and then one thing he says like let's put Wall Street regulation on the ballot. Like, idiot. I think this just personifies like exactly why this is stupid. Do you know how? Okay. I want Kyle to mention 5 Wall Street regulations. I think he's gonna list probably like he's gonna list in Glass-Steagall. So he wants to separate commercial and investment banking, which I support. And then that's like the only one I think he's ever mentioned that's actually a concrete policy. Make him list like on his finger, like for every he can't. He thinks in a vague Wall Street way. You like Wall Street bad. Okay, in what ways? And I can you mention it? He's like, oh, he like goes apeshit and doesn't know. He's like, well, and he might point out all the problems, but you can't. If you put the rubber to the road, exactly like, can you go to the details of like finance, like the finance industry? So wonks, this is why we have experts, why we need experts, why we need a functioning bureaucracy to figure this shit out, not people. So this is why we need that instead of direct democracy. So that's kind of my thoughts on the matter. Just wanted to make an open case about it, give my own spiel to it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like, share, and subscribe. Be sure to share it around. And if you really like it, I'm actually gonna stop using Patreon. I'm gonna move towards like a PayPal thing. Basically, like if you really like to shoot me $1, if you really like my videos, I know like, hey, here's $1. I liked your video. So yeah, I'm gonna move toward that. Yeah. So that's the thing. That's the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Aim high, wander on, from America with Russian love.